I've picked up a couple of devices or broken devices from eBay recently, and this was one of them. This is a, I'm not sure what the proper name for these things are, but it's kind of like an overhead projector, but one of those if you wanted to feed the image through to a regular projection screen. And I came across these in university. There's one of these at the front of the desk, so if there was OHP transparencies on here, it was picked up by a camera module just on the movable arm, and it then was projected on the projectors around the room and the screens. And it would also allow you to have physical objects as well to be imaged, and so you could kind of take and show off a device around the room. And they're really quite useful because it doubled up as an overhead projecting device. The rear light allowed the images to shine through, and you've also got these lights on the side which works with real objects. And so this popped up for a really reasonable price, I think, and I thought, why not kind of go for it. It was sold as having a dodgy camera on here, and so it's possible I might be able to repair it, but if not, it was kind of an interesting find nonetheless. The unit itself is kind of semi-functional at the moment. There's a large amount of kind of case damage on the side here, but it does kind of power up. The system on the front, zoom in a little bit. So the front here, it's kind of lamp controls. These kind of seem to work. You've got the base light, although I imagine there's another tube along the side which isn't powering up. And then you've got the upper, focusing. And then there's the other lights up here which come on, but there's no LED for those, so by the looks of it that's kind of broken. The control here controls the different sources, so it's got two AV inputs as well, so you can plug in like a sound and a video source, so you could have multiple things running, so using this as a central hub, and if you're focusing your presentation around a device like this, you can switch between the internal camera and the two other input sources. And these work. I've fed in a video feed into this thing, and I've taken a look at the output, and what you feed into either of these comes out, so that side of the circuitry is great. Obviously it is dead coming from the camera, there's no sign of activity there. On this side there's a kind of zoom and focus controls, and this does seem to sound like it's working anyway. The kind of focusing controls, put that in shot. So the focusing controls are kind of rotating this around, so it looks like that. The optics at least are working. Autofocus doesn't seem to work. That suggests it might be actually looking at the image from this and using that to work out what's going on. And zoom, it makes a slightly unpleasant noise, so maybe that's half working, not quite sure. But I think most of the problems are going to be inside this unit here, so we can take a look at that and dismantle it. But just around on the top side here, so there's a lot of this kind of case damage and cracking, so it's probably been dropped at one point or another. This thing does come with a carry handle, so it's meant to be moved around. So presumably someone just dropped it on its side and stopped working. But it's quite nice on the back. It's got kind of power input, a serial port of some kind, so maybe you can control zoom focusing and input switching from elsewhere. Might be a bit of kind of computer software that could work with it, or interface with other kind of projection systems. And the output, so you've got S-video kind of running through composite kind of picture signal and mono audio, and you've also got BNC output as well. So if I can get it working, it'd be quite a nice little find, this. I removed the cover from the kind of presenter unit last night, and I had a little kind of fiddle around. I had a bit of success. Before I get started, I just want to run through the unit itself, because it's a really interesting device, this. I was really quite pleased. It's quite an interesting construction. The case comes off in two parts. The front kind of panel here sits over, and then the back piece, a couple of screws underneath, and the whole kind of piece clips away. Very interesting. And you've got the main kind of board here. You've got two kind of tubes down each side, which then kind of reflect through and illuminate that out. And you've also got the lights on the end of these arms here. the wiring for this all comes back to this main kind of driver board here. So this is to run give it the power for these lighting kind of rigs, and relays on the side here which kind of switch that in and out as needed. The front panel along here is just a kind of straightforward PCB. There is nothing going on here. It is literally just kind of buttons and lights feeding back to the electronics at the back. There are a number of unpopulated components on here though. We've got kind of positive, negative controls and kind of colour black and white switch. So presumably this would be to highlight other kind of facets about an object you're presenting. So positive, negative might kind of allow you to represent it in a different way, or might make a feature which might be quite dull a lot more clearer. Again, similar kind of reason for having the black and white. These, I'm going to try and I might try and put some switches in and lights in here later just to see what happens, because sometimes a device like this will be intentionally crippled, but only in a very crude way. So rather than the manufacturer having to produce two distinct devices, they stick all the electronics on because it's pretty cheap, but then just maybe leave off a few kind of buttons which control it. And so it means the only difference between for example, this model here and a much better model would be a different kind of board. So that's something to kind of have a look at later on. So out and around back here, we've got everything else. The power kind of comes into here and due to a switch, and the power then runs through into the main kind of power supply units back there. Power from that then feeds out this intermediate power board here. I'm not quite sure what this is doing yet. Maybe it's like a secondary switch mode supply of some kind. It might produce some intermediate voltages. But that seems to be the only thing hooked into the main power supply up here. Everything else that's going on is on this board, or these boards here. And this was screwed down into the plate, and it's where everything kind of matches. Left on the back here is the kind of output panel, and this is this kind of takes just the analog kind of video feeds and audio feeds and outputs them in a variety of different formats. And obviously also takes the inputs in as well. You've got this board here, which is kind of controls a lot of the kind of raw analog feeds, and then there's a second board along the back there. I might try and take another proper look at these later, but it's an interesting kind of mix of surface mount parts and through-hole components. Quite an interesting double-sided configuration. The camera head connects down to the main board through two sets of cables. And this flat ribbon cable here, which I believe is responsible for focusing adjustments and other kind of digital controls you're going to send back to the camera head. And then there's this bundle of wires here, and so this is the four kind of connections running through here. There's going to be kind of a picture signal, as if it's S-video, it might be broken out into kind of luminance and chrominance channels rather than just a combined picture. It's possible there's a microphone up there because there is an audio out on here, which might explain another one, but I'm not quite sure why there'd be four at this stage. It's that, and then finally is the camera head itself, which I'll just put around here. So it's the camera heads. It's this part here was attached to the other side of the housing and contained a single kind of adjustment, although again a lot more unpopulated components for further kind of functionality may offer additional things. The silk screening on all these parts is really vague, other than the front panel down there. It's very unclear what anything is for on here, although there is one exception to that, which is the camera head. This board was very loosely just tucked in the side and kind of fell out. I pulled it apart, and this is acts as presumably just a kind of simple interface board given the minimal number of parts on here. It just connects in. The camera head itself is a Sony camera, and it's consists of a couple of boards which fit together in a really kind of cool way. So they're kind of connected with these edge connectors here, and the circuit boards kind of plug in like so. And each board is labelled, or most of them are, and this is labelled video. So this contains the analog video outs. So this might be some kind of final stage thing, but still accepting a lot of controls in to maybe tweak and optimise the picture and the colour. This one here, that kind of came through to the panel on the side, control, iris control. I don't really know enough about kind of camera technology to know what that would represent, but hopefully I can test that out later. On the side here there's two additional boards. This one was labelled power, and again just kind of clips in and will kind of generate required voltages, things like that. This one on the back has actually got the sensor itself, so that'll be presumably doing kind of low level video stuff. And on the side here, or into here, we've got a couple of motors controlling the zoom and focusing. Now these motors have got these little kind of sprung mechanisms on the end, and this allows it to, so the controls at the front of the unit, if you were to zoom in for example, it'll keep on rotating the motor. It doesn't know where the extreme is, it doesn't need to know, it just, when you press keep hold of one of the buttons, it just keeps on rotating this motor, and this spring allows it to then slip. So when it hits its limit, it doesn't need any kind of logic in there to know that, okay, we've reached our limit, let's stop rotating this motor. It's just, yeah, let's carry on rotating it and let the gear kind of slip, and the lens itself won't go any further. It's quite a clever idea, that one. So yeah, so that was that. I mean, I dismantled these parts last night and then put it back together again, and it worked. I didn't notice anything obvious, but I presume, given that the camera was completely dead, one of these connectors here was most likely out of alignment, or had just shaken itself free, which was very kind of good news, because I was very pleased to see that function when I powered it up again. So I'm going to power it up now and take a look. I've got the camera presenter set up here, just an object in view. As you can see on the TV behind, we've got a picture. I'll wave my hand in front. See the image. The system, the camera in here is very, very sensitive in terms of its focusing range. It's very narrow, so it's a little fiddly getting this in place. So you've got zoom controls. You might be able to hear the motor whirring away there. So that zooms in quite deep. I'm not sure if it's going to focus at that level. I don't think so. And then you can then zoom all the way out. And the focus controls, I'm going to take it in and out. If I unfocus it a little bit, the autofocus doesn't seem great. It might be kind of limited with its conditions, but for example, at this point here where I zoomed all the way out, it won't focus at this point here where it's slightly above the surface. If I drop it down, it might help a little bit. I guess that's about right in there. But to focus at the higher point, I did need to zoom in a little bit. Yeah, you can see it, the image becomes a lot sharper. And so it's, I need to do some more experimenting with this to see what the kind of ranges are, and whether it would be kind of suitable for kind of photographing a large object and keeping most of it in focus range. The head of the kind of camera unit as well also does come up a fair bit higher. So you can see, and on the screen you can adjust that so that it's has roughly that whole kind of plate in view there. Onto there. And in addition to that, the camera also came with what was screwed onto the lens is this adapter here. I think it doesn't really say what it is, and AC2, it might give me the information as to what type of zoom it is, but it, I believe it's just a macro lens, so it's giving a little bit of extra zoom, but it does reduce the focal length or the kind of focusing range down to a much tighter band, which is kind of across, which was, I believe, was kind of up at that level somewhere. So again, that's worth having a play with. So right now, I've got a few things to investigate with this unit here. If I switch over to the base light, that one powers up, but this one doesn't. So what I'm going to do is switch the bulbs over and see if the issue is with the bulb itself or with the kind of control circuitry down here. That will hopefully let me know if I can repair the circuit board somehow, or if I can try and identify what bulb this is and get a replacement for it. I'm also going to kind of solder in a couple of PCB switches onto the front panel down here, just to test this out. And the other idea I had for this was to build in some kind of video capture unit. So I find a fairly cheap, basic USB to video capture device, and there's plenty of room within the casing at the back, and I could build that into it and put a USB port on the back. So in addition to plugging this into a TV, you could plug it straight into a computer and capture a video feed that way, which would hopefully make it even more useful. So you can do a couple of these experiments and then hopefully see what the results are. I took the risk and populated the components on this front board, and it's half paid off. The lights are kind of working. I mean, these are basically on-off lights for the colour black and white function, so you can think of it as a the kind of colour kind of on-off, or positive kind of on-off kind of thing. And so it makes sense that these are on, and to show it's like a standard positive image and it's showing colour. But that's kind of where my luck ran out with this, sadly. The colour and black and white one is the first one I looked at, and it's quite bizarre. You can see that it switches over as it expects. I'm going to point up at the screen now and show you what happens. And so that's the colour view. Switch over to black and white. Nothing. But it hasn't lost signal. In other modes, it'll, when the camera wasn't working initially, oh wait, no, there it has. Okay, so it's, I think there's something going on with the, maybe another kind of functionality, part of the camera, so rather than switching over to black and white and saying I'm going to post-processing, it's actually using a black and white function on the camera, and it's possible that the camera module fitted in this case simply doesn't support that, and switching into an unsupported mode. It's possible again there are unpopulated components elsewhere. There's a lot of unpopulated parts on the electronics at the back, so there's maybe something there, although it's certainly not as easy to start filling in parts and seeing what's going to happen. The other function, positive negative, kind of the same really. It toggles either state, right down there. I ran out of green LED sadly, so they're kind of yellow. But picture's a little bit weirder in this case. So that's positive, and that's negative. It's got a solid, this kind of black band down the side here, and that does seem to be influenced by the light in some sense. So if I kind of move my hand in front of the camera, I'm getting that rippling on the black on the side, which is very weird. I don't know enough about camera technology to really try and identify what that kind of artifact is and whether it's explained by something, and so sadly I'm kind of at a loss with that. I think it was still worth making the change though. It's interesting to see that it's kind of half implemented, but these are then kind of covered by the front panel, so it doesn't really impact anything. So on the front board here, we've got a blank area there and so whilst the switches and lights may be up beneath, they don't really get it in the way. The other thing to look at is the light. So the light on the bed of the unit, switch over to the base. One of the bulbs works, and so this was the bulb from the right hand side. I switch it over to the left, and that functions correctly. So it's the tube that's gone and none of the electronics, so I'm going to still take a look and try and get hold of another one of these. Hopefully it's going to be possible. The other thing's the little LED here. The LED is fine, it does work. I've tested that directly, it powers up, not a problem. So it's possibly going to be something back on one of the circuit boards at the back of the unit, because that's where this kind of cable bundle runs off to on the side. The other thing on here that I haven't had a chance to really investigate yet is there's a serial connection on the back. I'm going to plug this. And so we've got an RS232 serial connection on here. And that is, that kind of plugs onto one of the main boards inside. And presumably through to one of the main processing chips. The main processing chip on here. And that is, I was hoping to find a kind of a TTL level converter, so I could then tap into the TTL side of things and feed that directly into the system, but sadly I don't have anything at the moment that I can really use to read the RS232 ports, at least not with me, so that will have to wait for another time to see what's going on there, and whether there's anything accessible or usable. Like I say, I'm going to try and get hold of a video to USB adapter to build into here somehow, but for now I think it's been a pretty successful repair. The damage to the plastic case I'm going to take a look at and see if I can prove that or repair that somehow, but I'm really pleased this is now up and running again, and all I've got to do now is find a use for it. But yeah, hopefully there will be a follow-up video a little later on with the upgrades to this unit. I've picked up a couple of devices broken devices from eBay recently, and this was one of them. This is a, I'm not sure what the proper name for these things are, but it's kind of like an overhead projector, but one of those if you wanted to feed the image through to a regular projection screen. And I came across these in university. There's one of these at the front of the desk, so if there was OHP transparencies on here, it was picked up by a camera module just on the movable arm, and it then was projected on the projectors around the room and the screens. And it would also allow you to have physical objects as well to be imaged, and so you could kind of take and show off a device around the room. And they're really quite useful because it doubled up as an overhead projecting device. The rear light allowed the images to shine through, and you've also got these lights on the sides which works with real objects. And so this popped up for a really reasonable price, I think, and I thought, why not kind of go for it. It was sold as having a dodgy camera on here, and so it's possible I might be able to repair it, but if not, it was kind of an interesting find nonetheless. The unit itself is kind of semi-functional at the moment. There's some large amount of kind of case damage on the side here, but it does kind of power up. The system on the front, zoom in a little bit. So the front here, it's kind of lamp controls. These kind of seem to work. You've got the base light, although I imagine there's another tube along the side which isn't powering up. And then you've got the upper, focusing. And then there's the other lights up here which come on, but there's no LED for those, so by the looks of it that's kind of broken. The control here controls the different sources, so it's got two AV inputs as well, so you can plug in like a sound and a video source, so you could have multiple things running, so using this as a central hub, and if you're focusing your presentation around a device